Hi, everyone, and welcome to a live open class.
Hi, everyone.
We have a lot actually, we have a couple of things I want to go over before we go into, the open class. And we just talked about it before starting recording, so that's why, me and Michelle are smiling a little bit. But the first question was actually this one. So, Michelle, you did your first open class on your own this week. How did it go?
Good. I think it went really well. I was just telling you how nervous I was. But I think in the end it went all right. But I was really nervous, and it actually surprised me how nervous I was. I was surprised by it. But I really enjoyed it in the end. I was more nervous than I
100%.
expected.
Yeah. Actually, watching it, it was great. I mean, I could tell you were a little nervous for the first introductory, but as soon as you started answering the question, it seemed like you were kind of like, okay, now you get into it and whatnot. But it was a great episode.
Yeah, it's like the first 5 minutes, that you do anything, I think
Yeah.
is the most nerve-wracking. Then at some point you're like, oh, it's okay. And you can just kind of keep going. Yeah.
Very well, and yeah, as you saw, and a lot of people know that so many nice comments. It was really
Yeah.
brought a lot of value. And speaking of that, there was another first, which was in the one-on-one coaching program where you can book sessions where you where people can talk to you via Zoom. You had your first client in that program today.
Yes. Yeah.
How did it go?
It was really great. Yeah, we just wrapped up a little while ago. It was so great to meet her. It was awesome. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to working with more people that way. It was really great.
Super, super nice to hear that. And I have some news I wanted to share too, which was that I got in touch with someone who's a professor who also has a large following, who happened to come across my book, Set It and Forget It, and she has like a 2.7 million people newsletter that she today, Friday,
Is
sent
that
out. Yeah, shared my book, Set It and Forget It,
oh,
and I just today I just saw that there were 60 new subscribers to the YouTube channel, and
oh,
it was
amazing.
so nice, super nice.
That's so cool. And she just stumbled on your book?
Actually, it was one of those stories like this led to that, which was I don't know if you remember. Do you remember Alexei Guzey, who was a guest on the channel?
I think so.
Somewhat. He wrote an essay on Matthew Walker's book, Why
Yeah.
We Sleep, where he showed that there's so many problems with that book.
Yeah.
So me and Alexei, been in touch a little bit, and he knew Barbara, who found the book, who sent the email out. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. That's so cool.
So that's nice growth. So if you're here since after finding this book, you know a little bit of a backstory, and welcome, of course. So with that said, it is open class. Let's, as always, disclaimer: nothing is medical advice. Just me and Michelle sharing some ideas and thoughts that we hope can help the community here. Let's look at three messages. Two are pretty short, and one a little bit longer. First one I know will resonate a lot with you. I think this is so profound and so helpful. So let's read this. Pat says, "Hi Daniel. I don't have a question, but a thought I'd share. I thought I'd share an important sleep-related insight that I thought the community would find helpful. I received an email from Martin Reed concerning a podcast he did with a client. His guest said something that really resonated. She said, sleep in itself isn't a measure of success. It's our relationship with sleep that is the true measure of success. How true is that? Exclamation mark. I hadn't thought of it that way, but it makes perfect sense. Hope your clients in the community find this helpful. All the best to you." To me, it's like, yeah, I was like 100%. But I'll let you go first, Michelle. What do you think when you hear this?
Yeah, I love that. It's such a profound statement, and I hope so many people hear that and have that inner feeling of like, "Oh my goodness, that's it." Yeah, it's especially when you're in a process of recovering from insomnia, the instinct is to start somehow maybe tracking your sleep or measuring your progress by your sleep, and that's kind of what we all do. We fall into that trap, but really it's not about that. And we can't control that at all, and so we can easily get frustrated using that approach. But if we really kind of shift to seeing it as like, well, what is my relationship with sleep and with the nighttime and with being awake at night? And kind of use that as more of an indicator for ourselves of how we're progressing. I think that's so much more helpful. so much.
100%. And, just to stay on this a little longer, like, exactly as you said, when we look at like how many hours we slept as a measure of success, then it just becomes so tricky, because then it becomes performance anxiety. Like, oh, and even if you spent, if you slept quite a lot one night, then it doesn't help, because like, yes, I got 7 hours. How can I do that again? It doesn't help. And so, so often what I teach now is like another set of like goals that are almost like non-goals, but other kind of measures of success are kind of like, I can have a night where it was really restless without judging myself, or I can feel all this anxiety without being harsh on myself, be kind to myself. And I think that leads to like this place where, there's almost like no goal. The goal is just to be kind or be okay with what happens. And then that leads to so much peace. And what do you think about that?
I love that because and those things are hard to do as well. Like being kind to ourselves, I feel like that's a learned skill and we don't realize it. And we just think it's just something that's easy but no, it's really can be very difficult to be kind with yourself in moments of pain and discomfort. So I really love that. And I used to, when I was in my own recovery process, I would kind of think of it as I'm going to see if I can just observe what's happening, right? That kind of became one of my, measures of success was, can I be in an observer role with myself with these thoughts and sensations and everything that's coming up? And that was how I started to measure my own success and progress was, can I just observe? Can I be with all of this, basically?
I remember you saying that, and it sounded so true then, so true now. And a final word on my end on this is that I think what you shared, Pat, is so helpful and true, and it applies, of course, not only to sleep but to like all of it. When we don't measure success in like how anxious I was, how much I slept, how much I felt this way and that way, but again, our relationship with that, how okay are we with the way things are, how kind of that it applies to everything, I think. So okay, with that said, thanks so much, Pat, for sharing this. And let's move along here to a longer message from Nick, who writes the following. Hi, Daniel. I saw all your videos and still have issues in sleep. Let me tell you my case, and do let me know what's wrong with me. Why is it taking too long for me to get well? My case. Last year, actually, I'm going to highlight this word too, because that in itself teaches us a lot. My case. Last year, I was sleeping at night, as usual, and a random thought came into my mind that I might not sleep. That fear was so intense that night that I thought, oh no, why did I think this? Knowing the fact that we can control sleep made it worse that night. So you can see that the fear and hyperarousal came randomly with a thought while I was in bed that night, and not because of bad sleep the night before. Actually, I slept awesome the night before. Now you can see from how long I haven't slept well. From that day, my life became hell. No good sleep at all. Looks like this thought has put me in shackles each second in mind. I read your lectures and analyze. My brain is giving me safety signals, but I'm actually listening. But still, this is just happening. I listen, let go, and just close my eyes. Still, the outcome is the same. Now you're going to say that I'm waiting for sleep, but don't you think the whole world, this one is an important one too, don't you think the whole world goes to bed waiting for sleep at night? I don't see the time as well. I see the morning sunlight without sleep from my window. I think desire to sleep can never go because the mind is conditioned to sleep at night, and our brain knows that. Fooling it doesn't make sense. So now you know my complete case, and I feel convinced that maybe my mind doesn't want me to sleep at all. Unfortunately, I got a habit of not sleeping, and my mind is enjoying it, but my body is not. And we're just normal beings. We are not saints. We can let go so easily. Deep inside, we still have desire to sleep. Hoping to get some insight from you. Please correct my approach if I'm going wrong somewhere. My brain asks me to close eyes and then trust nothing's happening. I'm not even giving any pressure to sleep, but I get disheartened each day in the morning when there's no sleep. You told the brain to stop warning thoughts when you told the brain stop warning thoughts when its purpose is met. So if I'm still getting fear thoughts that I can't sleep, which are not letting me sleep, that means somehow the purpose is still not fulfilled. So what exactly does my mind want from me? Thank you. Thank you, Nick, for being here and sharing this. And it's a lot that we could talk about here, of course, but Michelle, like your first reaction thoughts when you hear this, what are you thinking?
I jotted a couple notes down. And one of the things that I heard was like this, what is wrong with me? That was the first thing I noticed. And there's nothing wrong with you. There's so many of us going through this, and it's so normal. And ironically, the fact that this is happening actually means there's actually nothing wrong with you. Your brain is doing exactly what it's meant to do in this type of situation, which is to try to keep you absolutely safe. And it has unfortunately learned all of this fear around not sleeping and around being awake at night. And so it's reacting in a way that is completely normal. So there's first and foremost just absolutely nothing wrong happening. There's so much here. I want to start with the comment about, so I think it was Nick,
Nick.
getting his name right? Nick, the fact that you actually recognized and were aware that all of this came originally from a thought. Like he was describing everything was fine, and then he was in bed and he had the thought like, oh my God, what if I don't sleep tonight? A fear related thought. And then that really initiated everything. So I think that's really helpful to see that, that again, it really comes from this fear. And when we start to have these thoughts, like it really, really can put us in that type of fear place. And that's where all of this comes from, is this fear. So I thought it was great that he had that awareness that that's where this started. I started having fear-related thoughts around sleep, and now I'm in a pattern of having fear-related thoughts about sleep. And that makes complete sense. That's what we're all stuck in, right? When we're in insomnia, we're stuck in those thought patterns, those fear patterns, that feel like they really grip us. So yeah, I have a couple of other thoughts, but maybe
yeah. I want to jump in right there and say, I'm glad you brought that one up, Michelle, because of course everything you said I totally agree with it. I think it's 100% true. But I think there's something that to Nick is a little bit concerning, which is that for most people, it is true. It's rather that there is some external circumstance, some stress in your life that leads you to not sleeping, and then you become like afraid of not sleeping. Versus Nick said, nothing happened. It was just this one thought that produced everything, which it's true. What Nick says that that is not as common as like the usual like stress, no sleep, worry about sleep, but there's no difference really. It's just that, okay, this thought happened sort of by itself. It just came to you, but that doesn't mean anything is different. It is still the same, like the following, what happens next is still the same. So I just wanted to highlight that part.
That's a good point. That's such a good point. It's almost like a chicken and the egg, right? Because sometimes it can be, you're up, you're having a little trouble, then you have the thought, what if I don't sleep, and all the fear. But sometimes you're absolutely right. The thought comes first and then the trouble. So it can happen either way. That's a good distinction. I didn't think of that, but that's a good point. It can happen either way.
Exactly, and one one pretty common way that things happen the way it happened for Nick is that someone is like not having any trouble. They're just living their lives, and then they read a book. I'm not going to name any particular book, but they read a book that says you have to sleep 8 hours or you're gonna have some health problems. Then it's like, oh, I have to sleep. Then it starts again with the thought rather than a circumstance, but it's really the same thing. So I can share one thing, and then we can go down your list, Michelle. But as you, everybody who was with us a few minutes ago saw that I highlighted some things, and the first thing I highlighted was actually like in the very first sentence from Nick. It says something like, Daniel, I've listened to everything you said, but I still don't sleep. Mm-hmm. And this is one of those circumstances where we can learn so much from one single word, and it is the word still. And when we use the word still, or this happened but I still don't, or I'm doing this yet I haven't seen any difference, I'm doing this but this is still happening, like when we use those type of words, we can learn something about ourselves or what's happening inside us, which is that we have this idea that if I do X, it will lead to Y. We have the idea of cause and effect. This should lead to that. And when we have that idea, then it's really difficult for anything to really help you, because you're so focused on getting a result So when you're listening to this, let's do this meta thing where you say, like, you listen to me and Michelle speak in this very moment, and you're thinking, oh, this is going to make me sleep. Then that will not make you sleep, or that will not make you sleep, because nothing can make you sleep, right? It's a process of letting go. But I'm thinking I'm going on a sidetrack here. I do want to try to be really clear here. It's like when you use the word still, it shows us that we have the idea that if I do this, this will happen, and that's the idea that is problematic, because you can't force anything, you can't force sleep. So when you see that, it can just be like, aha, when you find yourself thinking, oh my gosh, I've been like so kind to myself, but I still am really angry. Then you're like, oh wait, I used the word still, which means I have this kind of like this cause and effect thinking going on, and that awareness can be really helpful and lead away from that cause and effect type of thinking. I felt I jumbled this a little bit, but did it make sense?
Yeah, it's like the it shows a bit of the energy behind it, or the intention behind it.
Yes.
I think you're right. Is like, if I watch this video or these videos, then this should be making me sleep. I get this. Why isn't this making me sleep? And then it's like the insinuation around control and forcing and everything that's coming from that, as opposed to, I'm watching these videos because I do want to learn, and I realize that just watching them and learning is not going to be the thing that makes it so that I start sleeping right now.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
exactly.
it's hard to describe, right? I'm like,
yeah, it is tricky, but I think between the two of us, I think we made a good point. So
I had a thought that comes off of that, actually, when you're saying, is that I think the other part of it is that the intellectual understanding of all this isn't necessarily enough to just start, to just recover from insomnia. It's a key part of it, of course. It's like the starting point, really, but that all of this it's like there's a practice involved with, like, observing and accepting and allowing and all of this, and it is a practice, and it is based on, there's an element of repetition, I think, needed with it, because the brain just needs to relearn all of this. It needs to unlearn all the fear, and that repetition and that practice ends up being really an important part of it. So it's like that intellectual understanding at the beginning is just the beginning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like, and that part, the intellectual understanding, like you said, that to me is the only part of the journey that you can really, that's kind of doing. You can sit down with a book and read that and do something and understand that. And that can happen pretty quickly, and it can be frustrating. We're like, I understand everything, so why isn't any change happening? Just like you say, then it's kind of like a set it, you've done the set it, now you have to kind of forget it. Like now comes the practice of letting go, being kind to yourself, et cetera, et cetera. Where those speed bumps often like can be instructive, like you go through some up and downs, and that's part of the practice, and then everything gets easier.
It's the implementation, like the learning part, the watching the videos or reading the books or whatever it is. It's the first step. It's step one. And it's really the repetition and the implementation that is the thing that not only are you going to learn the new skills, but your brain's going to slowly respond to that over time and learn and adapt as well. So it is really just the first step, I think. So I can understand why people would feel frustrated with, like, I get this now, I have clarity, right? And it's like, why isn't that enough? And it's normal that that's not enough. I don't think that's enough for anybody.
Exactly. 100%. Well said. And yeah, what's next on your list?
I wrote a note down about, he mentioned kind of this idea of, like, but of course we all want to sleep. Like, how can we even pretend that we don't want to sleep? Like, and that's true. Of course, like, we're always going to want to sleep. The idea of pretending we don't want to sleep is just not, like, we're not going to get our brains on board to convince ourselves that, like, we don't care at all and we never want to sleep. I think the difference is in acknowledging that we do want to sleep, but also the want to sleep versus, like, the desire to sleep. And when we get into that desiring to sleep, we end up chasing sleep, kind of like gripped knuckles, chasing it down. And most of us that are dealing with insomnia, excuse me, are really in the desiring place, where we're like, why isn't this happening? I need to get this. My life depends on this. And so there's this real, like, intense desire behind it. And I think that's a bit different than acknowledging, yeah, I would prefer to be sleeping right now.
Yes, you said it was exactly what I wanted to say too. every human being wants to sleep well. That's normal. Of course you want that, which is different from like desire, hoping, craving, wanting, needing. I have to have this. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just one other way of saying the same thing is that we can want something without being so attached to the outcome, to use kind of the wording, you know, the NATO wording there, that someone can be, and I often think about somebody who's like an athlete or a really, really high performing like entrepreneur or something like that. Like you can be like really wanting to win this game. But if you think that if I don't win this game, like I'm a total failure, I'm a fraud, then you're not going to be a great athlete, because so much depends on it. So you can really want to win this game, but then if you don't, then that's okay too. It's kind of the same thing. Like I really want to sleep well, but if I don't, that's all right. It's kind of same thing of another way of wording it.
Exactly it. Yeah.
Very well. So I think the other thing that came to my mind, of course, we could talk about this message from Nick for another hour, but to just pick out some things that I thought were very helpful is like Nick said, this has been on for too long with like 11 O's, like too long. And just like the word still, I think we can learn much also from just the word too. And often this is the context of like, let's say someone says, I'm just so tired. I'm really, really, really tired today, versus I'm too tired. You know, the first one is actually just descriptive. Somebody is really tired, but that's it. It's just like you just describe something, versus I'm too tired. In the word too, we find so much like, I shouldn't be this way. This is not normal. This shouldn't be happening. There's kind of the element of criticism and judgment in that. Versus, so I think when we kind of can see that, there is no right or wrong. There's nothing wrong here. I am really, really tired, but I'm not necessarily too tired. Maybe this is how tired I am because of all that's happened. And when we can see that, then we can leave that kind of the judgment and self-criticism, etc. And we can just see that, yeah, I'm super tired, but there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. That makes things a little easier. What do you think?
Yeah. And I think it's also like an acceptability threshold that is being set, right? It's whether it's the length of time that something's gone on or how tired it's making you feel, that somewhere in your mind you've decided what's acceptable. Like, you know, maybe it's 2 nights in a row without sleep, or maybe it's experiencing insomnia for 2 months is acceptable, but this is the 3rd month now, and this is now unacceptable. And so I think it's kind of almost seeing if you can think back and think like, well, what did I think was acceptable? Have I set a threshold here for myself somehow? And just realizing that these acceptability thresholds that we set are just thresholds we randomly set. They don't actually mean anything. They're not true. And just as much as we can to see that and see if we can let that go. Because like what you said, like the idea that it's indicating that there's something wrong, there's something off, like there's nothing wrong, and there's no being tired versus being too tired, right? Going on for too long. It's all just this subjective experience that we're just deciding in our minds and then creating more struggle around it, because now we've gone past a threshold that we've decided is unacceptable to us. But we can change it. We can just remove the threshold.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. I used to do this all the time, by the way. I had so many acceptability thresholds. I was good at it.
Yeah, no, well said. I have nothing really to add except that I totally believe all that to be true. And I think I had, if you have one more, you can go with that one. I think I had maybe one more to add before we go to the next one.
That was it. I made it through my list. I think
very good.
Yeah, we covered mine.
I know I highlighted maybe one more thing, but I think that might be the exact same thing you already commented on. Exactly, it was the same thing. Don't you think the whole world goes to bed? Exactly. Now you already answered that one.
It does go to bed with the hope of sleep.
Correct. All right. Well, I think hope this helped, Nick. Let us know if not. Comment or send another question to Open Class, and we'll go from there. Oh, actually, okay. One. Now I saw this one. I can't jump this one because Nick said let's do one last year, which is like Nick says. You said that if the purpose of these worry thoughts, they're basically signals from our brains, right? The purpose of them is to alert us to something, and when we just listen to them, then the brain will be like, okay, you listened, that signal has served its purpose, now I don't need to send it again. But Nick is basically saying like, you know, I'm listening, but they keep happening. So am I doing something wrong or something like that? Which is, this is another common but a little tricky territory. But what are your thoughts when you hear this?
Yeah, no, that's totally normal because if you're in that insomnia place, your brain's going to be so hyper aroused, so anxious, likely every night, possibly during the day as well. And so it's going to be creating a lot of fear based, a lot of anxious thoughts. And that's totally normal. So the idea that like, why do they keep popping up? It's because the brain is still in that hyper aroused place. So it's really just a sign of that, not that you're doing anything wrong. And sometimes you can hear that thought and then it will come back, or it will come back as a slightly different thought with the same meaning. And we can, and that's just that sign of that hyperarousal and that practice of being able to observe it so that you create that space between yourself and the thought and see if you can kind of allow it to happen and see it for what it is and let it go, and continuing that type of practice with it, as well as working with, befriending wakefulness and education and everything that you're doing right now, Nick, is all going to kind of work together over time to reduce that hyperarousal that is happening. And then as that reduces, the thoughts will come less and less over time. And it really just goes back to this idea that it is a practice. It takes time, it takes repetition, it takes ups and downs. Like those speed bumps are just a required part of the process. And you should notice that over time the hyperarousal is going to start to go down a little bit more. And as that happens, there'll be fewer of those like fear-based anxious thoughts coming up, especially at night.
100%. And you know, I was going in a little different direction, but now I found that we could tie this actually very nicely to where we started, which was again the measure of success, which is like if you think that, oh no, I am having this fear thought again, I must be doing something wrong, then again we're measuring success in a way that's not that helpful. But when we look at it as like, oh, I can see the thoughts now, I can identify them, and I can listen to them. And even if they happen again, it doesn't mean anything else. It just means that, you know, it takes a little while for the brain to fully see that it doesn't need to warn you. But I think that can be helpful. So Nick, again, hope this helped. And now let's move over to a question from Kylie, who says, and I'll share this, of course, common question, an important one, of course. It says, hello. Is it not uncommon for insomnia sufferers to take a long time to recover using CBT? I'm worried I'll get discouraged if I don't see results within weeks or even months. Thanks to you. Thank you and God bless. Thank you, Kylie. And when I read this again, it's a little different than when I first read it. So now I understand that the question is more from someone who's thinking of like, I'm thinking of kind of like doing this, and I'm worried that if I don't see results within weeks or months, I'm going to get so discouraged that I'll kind of abandon it. So what do you think when you hear that, Michelle?
I think like this is almost like a great example of like anxiety in like its most pure form, which is where we project out into the future and then worry about it now, right? Which is like I'm a pro at this. That's why I'm like I immediately thought of like, oh, that's how my brain works right there. To be pre-worried about it is, and again, like that's such a sign of like also having a hyper-aroused brain as well, is it's going to be constantly projecting into the future, looking for those threats. And right now the threat is, if this doesn't work fast, I'm going to get this, like, what if I get discouraged in the future? And that's another acceptability threshold too, right? We've decided that there's a certain amount of time where I need to see success or I might feel really discouraged and maybe give up on this or it won't work. So it's like combination of anxiety and an acceptability threshold around time and how long it's going to take. And that it's tricky as well with time because there is no set time for any of these things. There's no allotted time that CBTi or any approach with sleep is going to work. And it just, it can work quickly for some people. It can take a long time for others and everything in between. And so, really, really what is the most helpful is to completely eliminate time as even a concern or a thought. And I know how hard that is. That's really hard because when you're not feeling well, you just want to feel better. And especially if you've tried tons of stuff, there's almost this feeling of like, if I try something else, this has to work and it has to work quickly. Like I can't take it anymore. Right. So I understand that feeling. It's just helpful to kind of step back and realize that, you've put this acceptability threshold of time. It needs to be fast. And so it's almost like setting yourself up for kind of a failure, right? Because the more you're going to be focused on time, the more pressure you're in. You're in a pressure cooker now. If you have, let's say, a month for this to work or whatever it is, and then it's much less likely to work because you've put yourself in a pressure cooker with time. So when I was going through this process, ironically, one of the things that helped me was that I had had insomnia for 5 years. It had been a long time. And so I was able to let go of the time piece, I think, because I was like, well, I've already done this for so like I'm letting go of that time thing, right? And I don't know why that made it a bit easier for me, but it just did. And it's more helpful just to, do what you're doing, and in Claire Weeks's, words, continue to allow more time to pass without being all too much focused on time. Just keep moving forward in the direction that you're choosing to do, and see if you can let go and catch yourself, right? Like have that observation of, oh, I'm thinking about time again. I'm putting pressure on myself, and see if you can just observe that. And just observing it alone will help because you'll just see it and see if you can be a little bit kinder to yourself and just remove the time pressure from it.
So well said. And you used the word I've never heard, but it makes like so much sense, which is like pre-worry. Did you just make that up, or have you used it before?
I have no idea. It was created right here. I think I've made it up because I do that. I do that with myself a lot. I fall into this trap of like, oh, I'm pre-worrying about some sort of event in the future that hasn't happened yet. And then my favorite examples in life is when I'm really, really pre-worrying about something intensely, and then the thing doesn't even happen.
Right.
Not even does it happen in a different way, like it doesn't even happen. And then I go, oh my God, I worried about that for a month. And then it just, nothing
Didn't
happened.
even happen. Exactly.
Oh
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah, that's a good word. Pre-worry. Yeah, I'm gonna start using it. Pre-worry. And yeah, I had some things to add here for sure. And I just want to share some live comments from Natasha here. She said, what techniques can we do to combat hyperarousal thoughts? Okay, we can go back to that one. Then we have CBT did not work for me. And I think she said, me too, when you described like the pre-worry and like those tendencies. She just agreed. But so CBTi didn't work for me. And this ties into, what Kylie asked about, which was like, okay, I'm thinking of doing CBT, but I'm worried if it takes a lot of time, I'm going to abandon it, etc. And kind of my thought there becomes like, as many in the community know here, I don't think CBTi is often the best way to approach things for the reasons you mentioned, Michelle, which is that we have this time element, a lot of focus on time and controlling, etc. And I'm thinking, Kylie, like, you're here already. Like, you're listening to this, you submitted a question, like your journey has already begun, and without any like effort, you're not doing anything but learning. So why even add a time component? Exactly like Michelle said. And so I think that was maybe the most important one. And then I also again say I don't necessarily think you need to do CBT. If that sounds good to you, then of course that's what you should do. But you can just spend some time here learning, just like you're doing now, Kylie, and things will come, come to you. Like things will become more clear and things will get better. So I think we answered that in full. And I think maybe this will be our last question then. Natasha says, what techniques can we do to control hyperarousal thoughts? When I read this one, I of course, first thing that I think is thank you, Natasha, for sending this. And I, of course, want everyone to know that I never ever mean anything I say as any type of like criticism. I'm just like teaching for the hoping that anybody will really learn. So with that, preface or with saying that, in advance here, I want to say that when we think of something as a technique to control, then automatically there is some element of like struggle there, because the things that we desire to control, which is, for example, hyperarousal thoughts. We want to control our thoughts. We want to control our emotions. We want to control our sleep. Those are inherently uncontrollable. Like they cannot be controlled. And the illusion is often that, but other people seem to sleep just fine, and they seem to they're calm all the time. They must have control. No, they don't. It's actually the absence of trying to control things that leads to a place of peace. So I think maybe the first thing to that can help here is just seeing this, that when we look for a tool or technique to have control, then automatically we're sort of on a path that leads to more struggle. So with that said, then the question becomes, okay, I see that, but I still, I have a lot of hyperarousal thoughts. I have a lot of these thoughts. They're uncomfortable. I would, of course, want not to have them so much. And my go-to reply there becomes that, thoughts are really just like these warning. Our brain is a safety machine. It sends us these warning thoughts, like, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if this? What if that? And if we I don't want to hear, then the brain goes like, hey, now you got to listen. This is important stuff, like blah, blah. Like then it pushes them. But when we're like, okay, I'm having this hyperarousal, I'm having these warning thoughts, and I understand where they come from. They come from my mind being my friend and trying to help me. Then we listen to the thoughts. Then it sees that we don't have to. It doesn't have to push it so much. So that's my go-to thing for this one. Does that make sense, Michelle?
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I noticed in the question was she used the word combat. How do I combat?
Oh, yeah.
Right. And I thought the first thing I thought it was like right there, it's like that insinuation of a battle, right? You're going into battle, which so many of us feel like we're doing night after night after night, whether it's with our sleeplessness or our hyperarousal symptoms. And so the question in and of itself is framed around like this going into battle with something awful, which I get and I did for many, many, many years. But therein lies the problem, is that you're engaging in a battle of some kind. And I'm going to steal Beth, something that Beth said last week, where she said, at some point I took off my boxing gloves. That's it. I took off my boxing gloves. And I think she even said, and then I learned to dance with it. And I was like, oh, that's really beautiful. Yeah. And so really it's instead of combating it, like, how can we step out of the struggle with this? And that goes to how you answered it, right? How can we allow this? I know, yes, I relate to that. I relate to that deeply. My battle was really long as well. And I think no matter what the length of your battle, it somehow feels even longer because you've been in the battle for so long. But the longer it is, or that it's been, sometimes there's even more relief with going, I can just take these gloves off now. I don't have to do this anymore. I can approach this differently. And there can be so much like peace in that type of surrendering, I think.
100%. And I was just about to borrow another little analogy, which is from Neil, who's guested the channel a couple of times. And he said something that made me laugh, but it was sort of so profound at the same time. He was like, at some point he said, I just went like, yeah, insomnia, you win, I give up, you win. And it's like, it's funny, but it's like so true. He like, when you give up, you raise the white flag, you throw up your gloves, and then it's over. Then there's no battle.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
What's that? Okay, so one more here was like, using breathing techniques makes me more conscious of my anxiety. Never had any result. To me, this one is like, it's such a common one, such important. Like when we use a breathing technique to not be anxious, then again, we're not listening. We want to escape something that then becomes amplified. So thanks for bringing this one up, Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah.
And
I relate to that. Sorry, I relate to that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
I used to, I have so many memories of laying in bed and having, like almost like an anxiety attack with your heart rate is really high. There's panic or sweating. All this is happening. And then thinking, okay, well, I'm going to use a breathing technique. So box breathing, or just something like that, where there's like a controlled element of your breath, right? You might be trying to slow down your breath to a certain count. You might be trying to hold for certain periods of time. And for me, I remember like I would literally feel my heart rate rise when I would do this, because my body was already in a panic state. And to control my breathing through breath techniques added more stress at that time. So not to say that, breathing techniques are bad or anything like that, but, why are you doing them? So the intention that you just mentioned, right? And sometimes if you are in that state of anxiety or in panic, it can cause more anxiety or panic to suddenly start to constrain breath or control breath in any way. Yeah.
Can see that
Mm-hmm.
very well. And yeah, finally here, I just want to say that anyone who likes the teaching here and thinks that me and Michelle makes sense, and you want to work with us, you can of course go to the Sleep Coach School and check out the immunity program that you and I alternate moderating every week. So you're very welcome if you would like that. So what else, Michelle? What are you doing this weekend?
Oh gosh, actually, I don't really have any plans this weekend, and that's what I'm excited about. How about you?
Very nice. Same thing here. I have some plans, but my my 7-year-old, she's a little sniffly, a little sick, so we're just gonna take it easy, which is nice.
That's perfect.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Michelle, as always, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.